Welcome, all you sinners and sodomites, to episode
37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row?
of Bible Stories for Atheists. We hit our clerk's birthday.
Woo!
I am Josh.
I'm Linz.
And we are your guides to the problematically pious stories, literally littering the Bible.
37.
37
in a row.
I think technically we have a couple more if you add in a couple specials that we did along the way.
Did you not number the specials?
No, I didn't. In retrospect, I would have, like, now. One of the specials was the holiday special from last year.
Okay.
So this episode is like going to be coming out right around Christmas. Life's been busy. I have not put in the effort of figuring out a Christmas episode this year. So
How many times can you rehash Christmas?
I mean, everybody does every year.
But
right?
do we need to keep doing it?
No, not necessarily. But I do think there's more stuff that we can dig
Is
into
there?
around the lore of Christmas.
Okay.
Why we have what we have with Christmas, like where it comes from and stuff. Barring that, yo Saturnalia, everybody.
Yo, Saturnalia.
Yeah, go back if you're interested. Go back to last year. We did Saturnalia for the Paganalia is the name of the episode, and it's really good. And it talks about the origins of Christmas and
Right.
how the stories we've been told by the church might not be entirely real. I know it's a shocker, but one other thing I did want to talk about, there's a certain rapper out there who's been spreading some anti-Semitic shit. One thing I just wanted to point out with our show, we talk about the Old Testament. We're going to be talking about it in this episode too. We have nothing but respect for Jewish people, for the Jewish faith and everything.
The same respect we have for the Christian faith.
I mean, honestly, I have more respect for the Jewish faith. Honestly, I have more respect than anything for the Jewish culture and like the history of the Jewish people and everything. And we'll dig into a little bit of the history again in this episode.
Are you trying to make it sure people know we're not anti-Semitic because sometimes we call Judaism on its bullshit?
Kind of, but really what we're trying to do is going at it from more the perspective of Christians who believe this stuff but don't pay attention to like where does it come from?
Right.
What is the history of these writings that they based their religion on, you know? Mm-hmm. Christianity more and more to me seems like a parasite that affixed itself to this other
100%.
thing, you know?
Religion as a whole doesn't make sense.
No.
And that is all religions, but we respect people.
Yeah,
all
exactly.
people.
Exactly.
Except for anti-Semites.
Yeah.
They can go fuck themselves.
Yeah, they can go fuck themselves. Anyway, so strap in, strap on for episode 37.
Oh, why don't you come up and uncover my feet sometime?
We're in the 4th season of the show.
Oh, okay. That's right. How are seasons determined?
You know, let's not ask those kinds of questions. I try and just kind of group stuff together by what makes sense, like the Gospels. But then we started season 4 with the Book of Job.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
Which we just wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no real idea of where the season was going to go.
Okay.
But now I have a roadmap.
Oh, all right.
I have a roadmap for the rest of the season, and I actually have an idea for the next season as well. So for the rest of this season, though, we're going to cover the Book of Ruth.
Okay.
The Book of Esther. We're going to do the two women.
The two ladies.
The two ladies. And then the Book of Jonah. And you could almost call them the godless books.
Okay.
Like Job, it was all about being put to the test
by God,
but he was
there.
God's there. Yeah, definitely there.
Main character in the story.
And this is like, again, let's not look too closely at this. But Ruth, God doesn't do anything throughout the entire book.
Figures.
He is talked about,
right.
But he doesn't actually do anything. And then in Esther, he's not talked about at all.
Okay.
Throughout the book.
Sure.
And then Jonah is all about a guy trying to get away from God, basically.
So that way he goes inside a whale.
Yeah, well, a big fish. It's an important distinction, Lindsay.
Is it?
Yes.
All right.
Apparently. So anyway, with that, we're going to do the book of Ruth today. And like I said, it's only 4 chapters long.
Sure.
So it's a very short book.
Okay.
And we're literally going to read the entire thing today.
Yay.
Yeah. The book is set in the time of Judges, which in theory would be around 1100 BCE. In fact, the tradition is that this was written by the prophet Samuel. And this is when Israel was basically just a bunch of separate tribal areas that had warlords reigning over them that later got called judges.
Okay.
So it's not like a court type of judge.
Gotcha.
You know, this is just like a title. And
The warlords conveniently gave themselves a non-threatening title as opposed to warlord.
well, really, it's people generations later calling them this.
Judges,
Yeah. And really like
Judge Dredd.
well, they are like warrior. They're more like generals.
Yeah,
You know,
like
and
Judge
stuff like
Dredd.
Kind of, yeah.
In Judge Dredd, the police officers are called judges.
Yeah. We're going to get into this. This is one thing I think we might take a look at in season 5 actually is the book of Judges, but some of that stuff is straight up pulled from other cultures. Like stories from other cultures. Yeah. So
Shocking.
So who knows what actually happened during this period? Not that any of this comes up. This just happens to be the era that
When this story took
takes place.
Okay.
Yeah.
About this woman,
Yes.
Ruth.
I got to go through this. There's a quick reminder on biblical history that's going to set this up. Bear with me. You're going to be like, what the hell does this have to do with Ruth? But it's all going to tie together at the end. So in 722 BCE, Israel in the north fell to the Assyrians.
Okay.
A bunch of people moved to Judah, which was a territory in the south, where Jerusalem was. Then in 587 BCE, Judah fell to the Babylonians, and all the Israelites / Judeans went into exile, mostly in Egypt, right, where everybody went. 550 BCE, Persia defeated Babylon and gave the lands that Babylon took from people back to the people they took them from.
Okay.
Okay, so Israelites, Judeans were able to go back to Israel. In 537 BCE, Ezra is apparently tasked by the Persian emperor to rebuild the Israelite temple that the Babylonians supposedly destroyed, though the original ruins for that temple have never been found. Okay, and the Ark of the Covenant, which we talked about previously, the Ark of the Covenant was supposedly stolen from that temple before it was destroyed, and they never bring that up again.
They just did a movie about it later.
Well, yeah, but like
And Indiana
Ezra
Jones found it.
Ezra never brings it up.
Okay.
Which makes you wonder, did it ever even exist? You know?
Right.
The first mention of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, as we know them today, is in the book of Ezra, when it mentions that he had a Torah with him. Biblical scholars like Richard Elliott Friedman think it's likely that Ezra, and possibly with a team, compiled those books together from writings they had saved from before the exile. And when I say compiled them together, I mean literally cut them up into each other to try and create a unified history of Israel. So a lot of stuff changes in that process. You know, this is why we had duplicate stories throughout the book of Genesis and stuff like that.
Right.
And then one of the sources he pulled from was a source called the D source, or the Deuteronomist. They wrote a book of law called Deuteronomy and books of history called Samuel and Kings. Another source was the P source, or the priestly source. These people, and they were probably a group, both of them were probably groups of people doing this, wrote a book of law called Leviticus and some of the parts of Exodus. They also wrote a book of history called Chronicles. And these two groups were at odds with each other. They were basically like denominations, both vying for superiority. So they have their own versions of this stuff. I know I'm losing you, but bear with me. We're almost
you see the
through
glaze
it.
coming over.
I know it sounds, but this puts in gives you a contextual history or historical context for this book, because scholars think that it's likely that Ruth was written by the priestly source as a way of showing the difficulties of following Deuteronomic law,
Okay.
which is a big theme throughout this book. They also believe it was written around or shortly after the time of Ezra, because Ezra was a huge racist. According to his own book, when he returned to Jerusalem and saw all the Israelites intermarrying with Canaanites and Moabites and Egyptians, etc., he tore his clothes in mourning. Quote, "They have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons, and have mingled the holy race with the peoples around them." In Ezra chapter 10, he sent out word to all the exiles, all the Israelites and Judeans who had been in exile, that they had to be in Jerusalem within 3 days, or they would forfeit their lands. And when they showed up, he told them that they needed to separate themselves from their foreign wives. Okay, so huge racist, right? Ruth is likely a protest writing to these policies, because intermarriage, like interracial marriage, is a core for this book.
Okay.
This book is about two women. A lot of people kind of see this as a feminist book. It'll be interesting to get your perspective on that.
I will be the judge of that.
Yeah, because it's a book about two women and their bond, in theory at least.
No, okay. That makes it a feminist book.
We'll see.
All right.
3 funerals and a name change. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Kilian. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Kilian also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So that sets up the story.
Okay.
Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah. It's literally just the P and the R switched.
Really?
Yeah. According to Wikipedia, Mahlon means sickness, and Kilian means wasting.
Weird.
Yeah, so they name their kids sickness and wasting. So it's a big indicator right there that, it's not a true story.
Sure. Yeah.
This is likely written as fiction. Was another thing I was going to point out. Like Job was written as fiction, likely. This was also probably intended to be fiction.
I see. So one of the 2 books in the Bible about women is made up.
Yeah.
I see. Instead of about an actual woman.
Right.
From the times.
Most likely, yeah.
Okay.
It's also weird that they married Moabite women, because in Deuteronomy 23, 3-6, it says, "No Ammonite or Moabite or any other descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation, for they did not come to meet you with bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt." And they hired Balaam, who we know.
With the donkey?
Yeah. They hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor in Aram, blah, 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 to pronounce a curse on you. However, the Lord, your God, would not listen to Balaam, but turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord, your God, loves you. Do not seek a treaty of friendship with them as long as you live. So it's interesting that they decided to marry Moabite women,
Yeah. It's almost like you can't tell people who to love or marry.
Yeah. It's like it just doesn't stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only other thing I was going to point out, because they mentioned they were Ephrathites. Ephrathah. Nobody knows for sure what it is, but it might be the Canaanite name for Bethlehem. So
okay.
Comes up one more time.
Ephrathah.
Yeah. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you want to come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who would become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she said. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. She changes her name, which
To Mara.
which never comes up again.
Do they still call her Naomi, or do they
Yeah.
just go back to calling her? So she asked them to call her Mara, and then nobody does?
Nobody ever
Well,
does.
that's rude. Nobody seems to listen to her.
No.
She tells the two chicks to get GTFO.
Orpah listened to her.
Which makes me think Ruth doesn't have anywhere to go.
Yeah. Well, when I was going through this, I was thinking, if this was real, it would make me think like, oh, her family life probably wasn't that great.
Must have sucked.
You know?
Yeah. If she's like, "No, take me with you."
Yeah. I've been wanting to get away from my parents for so long.
Yeah. But why would you want to? I mean, clearly she just wanted them to go away. She was like, "Be gone with you."
I don't know. It's like she thought they were going to be happier without her.
Right.
You know,
because then they could find other husbands, which they can't do unless their parents find the husbands for them. Is that the way it worked back then?
I don't know. But Ruth is going to find a husband by the end of this.
Is she?
Yeah.
With the help of other people, or does she do it all on her own like a big girl?
Kind of on her own.
Oh, good for
Naomi.
her.
I mean, like Naomi helps a little bit. Yeah, Naomi. I would say no. Naomi definitely helps.
Yeah,
but yeah,
interesting.
It's very much mother-daughter relationship though between them going forward.
Okay, all right.
So Naomi, the name means pleasant, which is I suppose interesting, and Mara means bitter.
Yeah.
Right. So that's hence the name change there. That does not last.
Yeah.
Like I said.
Yeah. Just call me bitter, because that's just who I'm going to be for the rest of my life, because my husband died and my two sons died, and I'm stuck with this one who won't go home. She just followed me here. And if I know anything about the world today, it's not going to be great, because she's from this place where they're not supposed to be in Judah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that they never even bring that up. They never even bring up the issue of the law with it. Yeah. So anyway, that was chapter 1.
Oh,
of the Book of Ruth.
So the whole entirety of the first chapter is Naomi was married to this dude who died, and then so they had to leave Judah.
They had to leave Judah
of a famine,
because of the famine
drought thingy going on. And then her husband died, and then her two sons, who married women of the place they moved.
Yep, Moab.
They died. And then conveniently, after all the men died, Judah had food again?
Apparently, yes.
And they could go back?
Yep.
Okay, that's the whole
But
first
Moab
chapter.
didn't, I guess. Moab didn't have food.
Or she just wanted to go back to where she was from.
Maybe.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, if they moved there, if they moved there because of a famine, and now the famine's gone, why not go home?
Right. It's interesting to me, too, that if this is a fictional story, what was the point of Orpah? I just don't understand like what the point of that character really was.
Well, Josh, you can't start a story about a woman without also having a man there with her.
No, her husband's name was Elimelech.
Oh, you're talking about the second wife.
Her daughter-in-law.
What the point of having her?
Yeah.
Well, you have to have somebody who listened and somebody who didn't, I guess. Or if you mention that you have two sons, then why wouldn't both of them be married? I don't know. It's probably
why have two sons? Why not have one son who's
one son,
married?
Josh?
Yeah, yeah, maybe
one.
Yeah,
you're not doing your job.
Yeah. Maybe it was just to talk up Elimelech a little bit better.
You got to have multiple sons,
right?
For the bloodline. Except when they die before they have children, which it sounds like they must have, because nobody's talking about.
No, yeah, they didn't have kids.
Grandbabies.
Yep, they didn't have any kids. Meet ugly, as in like not meet cute. Yeah, it's meet ugly. And this is chapter 2.
All right.
Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of the harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" Seems like a little bit of a red flag right there.
Who does that woman belong to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always want to introduce my friends to men who ask that.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you tell me who that woman over there belongs to?
Yeah. What are we in Florida? This is Texas. The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for the short rests in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have you found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." I noticed you rolled your eyes at when he was like, "I told them not to place a hand on you," or something like that.
Which means it is generally an accepted practice for the men servants to just be able to have their way with any of the female servants.
Yeah, it was like, well, shouldn't you tell them all of them?
Yeah. There's this whole thing now, right, where women from a very young age are taught how to be on the defense constantly, right? Women out in public, especially by themselves, are in just a constant state of readiness, right? Because, men. And there's been a push that's like, why are we teaching women all of these tricks to protect themselves? Why aren't we teaching men
how not to
attack
predatory
women?
Yeah.
And, it's because it's ingrained in the culture
for a very
long time.
Yeah.
That it's okay for men just to take what they want from women.
Yeah.
Unless otherwise told not to by somebody more powerful than them.
Right. One thing that stands out to me with this section too is like you were saying, Boaz is making an exception for her to not be molested by the harvesters, and then also making an exception for her as a foreigner.
Right.
Like,
but it doesn't sound like he's not hiring her.
Right.
She's not, I guess hiring's the wrong word because servants aren't hired. Maybe, I don't know. Or are they
probably in some situations back then, but most of the time you'd be more like a slave for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
You know,
indentured servant.
Yeah.
So he's just basically like, yeah, you can hang out here like you're one of my servants.
Right. So she's a widow, and there are rules within Judaism at this point, in theory, to say, you have to let women, or you have to let widows, be able to
glean,
from your fields and stuff like that.
I thought the Bible said anybody could glean.
Technically, yeah. Technically, it's people who are in need,
right?
Is the idea behind it. But
they're supposed to be able to come in and take a portion of your goods from your field.
Yeah, you're supposed to leave the corners of the field unplowed. I'm trying to remember now if that was New Testament or Old Testament. I can't remember, but there's a lot of stuff like that, leaving stuff in the field for folks in need. So I don't know if you caught this, but he said, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. I just like that it's official in the Bible that God has wings.
Has wings.
Yeah.
Yeah. He is a dove.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. Giant dove.
Yeah. A third of him is.
Yeah, it's the what was the sky monster? The sky beast?
Oh, Zaz.
I
think.
Ziz.
I think it's Ziz. Zaz is from DC Universe. Ziz.
Yeah,
I think
maybe God is Ziz.
Yeah. They never do explain that. Yeah. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to the men. "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. And the footnote says that an ephah is probably about 30 pounds or 13 kilograms.
Wow, that's a lot. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just automatically suspicious of a guy who's like, yeah, let her glean, but leave a trail for her to pick up. We'll make it as easy for her as possible. Because then I'm like, well, what does he want?
Right. Yeah.
From her.
Right. From this woman he keeps calling my daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is he trying to make it so easy for her?
Right.
Randomly, this woman he literally just met.
Mm-hmm. And there is something at this point we don't know about him that Naomi does know.
Oh.
It's nothing like scandalous or anything.
Oh,
but
well, then I don't care.
Yeah, I know.
Where's the drama?
I should point out there's not a ton of drama in this story.
No.
Like I said, it's a very short story.
Okay.
So her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked for today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close with the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Is that the end of chapter 2?
Yes, that is how chapter 2 ends.
This man's safe.
Yeah.
Stay with this man.
Right. You might get raped at other fields.
Yeah, just saying. Yeah. He's a close relative who is nice constantly, it seems.
Yes. In the footnotes, it says the Hebrew word for guardian redeemer is a legal term for one who has an obligation to redeem a relative in serious difficulty. And it gives some sources for that. So this is a little bit of a sidetrack, just a short one. The guardian redeemer in Leviticus 25, verse 25 through 55 is where they talk about this. This is like just the first couple of verses of it. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value for the years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one whom they sold it. They can then go back to their own property. But if they do not acquire the means to repay, what was sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. It will be returned in the Jubilee and they can go back to their property. The year of Jubilee was every 50 years.
Oh, wow.
So I can't wrap my head around how their economy worked.
Well, it sounds like they're setting up the rules for pawn shops.
It kind of does.
Except for there's the one rule that modern pawn shops don't have, which is that after 50 years, you get it back. But not after 50 years, like on the Jubilee. So I guess if you sold something and next year happened to be Jubilee, like that's
they actually have stuff in there about that. Like if it's only a few years before the Jubilee, like you have to take that into account, kind of a thing. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. It does really sound like, here's how you pawn stuff to get money.
Right.
Because I assume that's what they mean by redeeming, right? Because when you think about the phrase redeeming, you like when you redeem yourself, you're I guess showing that whatever bad thing you did was like just a hiccup in your personality and not the way you are all the time, right?
Right. Well, redeeming seems to be basically you need to sell something because you're hard up for cash. Basically, a family member has to buy that from you,
right?
If they're able to,
right?
So that it stays, so that the property, and this is pretty much just talking about land. I think the property. It might also be talking about like slaves and stuff too. Who knows? But it has to stay within the family. Is the idea behind it? I guess it's a really interesting thing because it's unlike anything we really, I think, have in today's society, where it's like you have to try and keep that property within your family.
Yeah.
Also, though, I did want to point out later in Leviticus 25, we get this. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them, you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly.
Yeah, so, I think we covered that in some other book. I feel like
there's some similar verses in Exodus.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's backward and weird and
what?
Old, yeah.
What?
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah. Again, more racism, because it's about coming from,
getting your slaves from areas that aren't your area. It'd be like we live in Michigan, it'd be like if the rule of Michigan was like, you can get your slaves from like Ohio,
right,
but not from Michigan, or Canada, not from Michigan.
And technically you could take Israelites as slaves, but they would be afforded more benefits. And,
right.
They definitely, I think,
I don't think they could be handed down, right? They couldn't be generational, or it could only be for a certain amount of time or something like that.
If I remember correctly, there was a loophole for that actually built into it, where like you were only allowed to have an Israelite as your slave, I believe, for 7 years at most, except let's say you had an Israelite man as a slave. And then after a couple of years, you bought an Israelite woman, and then they got married. When the man's 7 years are up, his wife is still your slave for at least another 2 years. You can then have him pledge to be your slave ongoing, so that he can stay with his wife.
Gotcha.
and thereby make him a slave for life.
Can you imagine the whole idea of buying Israelite slaves back then was also matchmaking? So
Yeah.
you could, so you get a man slave, and then you spend the next 2 years trying to find the perfect female Israelite that you can buy for him, so that he'll fall in love and get married and stay with you longer.
Yeah, and you really do want him to actually fall in love because it's his decision to stay.
Yeah.
In
I wonder if that's where there's a particular like matchmaking is a huge thing in Jewish communities, right?
Oh yeah, J-date and stuff like that.
But there used to be these women, right? On the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, that show, her mom gets into it, doing the matchmaking.
Okay.
And
I don't really remember this part of it. But.
There's a specific term that they called themselves. And now I'm like, I wonder if this is how it started.
It was with slaves, Israelite slaves way back in the day. Oh,
man. You just had these, but you could see like a woman making a name for herself, maybe a widow.
Yeah.
And like, people come to her and like, I have this male slave who I want to keep longer than 7 years, and we need to work on finding a wife for him. So I'm going to pay you money to do this because, say he's been there for 5 years. If he gets married to a woman who they just brought in, then he'll be there for 12 years, probably, instead of 7. So I'm sure that rather than having to go and buy a whole new slave, who wants to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, shopping is hard. And what if you really like your slave?
Yeah. Black Friday still ways off.
Yeah. That feels like a terrible joke when you think about the history of slavery.
Yeah. I mean, there's very little good stuff you can really...
Slavery is just not funny in general.
Not really. No.
But yeah, I could totally see like a place for matchmakers in that community, just to keep that shit going.
Right. Yeah.
And like, what if they have kids? Are their kids automatically?
Yeah, same thing. They're owned by the owner.
And do their 7 years start when they're born, or do their 7 years start when they're able to work?
Right. I don't know how that works.
And do the parents stay around until that time because they have comfort, right?
Yeah.
They've been given the ability to raise the child and stuff. Like, it's just insanity, the whole
really
thing.
Crazy. Yeah. Today's episode is brought to you by Christianity. That's right, we've been paid to sell you the concept of Christianity. So I can finally say on one of these, buy it or you'll go to hell.
Josh, that's not how you sell someone Christianity. Judgment is for God alone. So buy it or you're a bad person.
Buy it because you have a Jesus-shaped hole in your heart that doctors can't fix.
You're broken. You're incomplete.
But no judgments.
You piece of shit.
Buy it or you're not the person I once knew.
Buy it or you're going to make your Nana cry.
Buy it or you can't really complete the 12 steps and you'll violate your probation.
Buy it or I'll leave you.
Buy it or you're just choosing to be a sinner.
Buy it or I was always right about you.
Buy it or your mom will miss you when you die because you won't be in heaven with her.
Just kidding. She won't care because she'll be incapable of feeling loss.
Christianity does come with extra benefits, like being smarter than everyone.
Like not worrying about all that science crap.
Like letting your church figure out how you should vote.
Like playing the persecution card.
Like being God's chosen one.
Like being happier than everyone else.
Because Jesus is your therapist.
And he charges by the hour.
So ask your pastor if Christianity is right for you. He'll say yes.
Use promo code BSFA at checkout for 10% more persecution.
Christianity is only available in the continental United States. At least that's what it seems like to the people who live here. A Redeemer Triangle.
Oh.
And this is chapter 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for." Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed with your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law had told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down on the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. You might be surprised to find out that some scholars apparently think that feet might actually mean genitalia.
What? Why would it mean that?
Yeah, because they wanted to sneak a sexy story into the Bible.
I see.
So,
it's
yeah,
much harder to uncover and lay next to a man's dick than it is his feet.
It's really funny when you think about that. Like, obviously, like this would be like they just use that as an analogy,
right,
for sexual contact and stuff. So in theory, Naomi's telling her to go seduce the guy.
Right. Yeah. So she went and hid in a corner while he ate and drank.
Yeah, on the threshing floor.
Yeah.
Which is
until he fell asleep.
Yeah.
And then curled up by his feet like a puppy,
or
on his dick, I guess.
Yeah,
curled up on his. But like, did they wear like dresses back then? Like the big long shirts, or did they wear pants? Because you can't did he go to bed with no pants on? If it is his dick, you can't just uncover his legs. Because what if there's pants on him? Then you have to take his pants off.
Right.
He's not going to sleep through that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Imagine waking up and me taking your pants off.
Yeah.
Like, that's not something you could just sleep through. You're not going to be like, oh, my pants are off when you wake up.
Right.
There's this woman next to my dick.
Right.
What?
I know.
Where did she come from?
It's so weird because they do keep talking about her lying at his feet. And it's like, that doesn't even make a lot of sense.
No.
Like, neither version makes sense.
Yeah.
Really.
Right.
At the end of the day. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. His kindness is far greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people in my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you were wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until this matter is settled today. And that's the end of chapter 3.
All right. So he doesn't, it sounds like he doesn't want to take her on. He was like, there's somebody else.
It's that somebody else legally has first dibs, basically.
To her?
He does seem to want to
right.
Have her as his wife
and
everything, but he doesn't have first dibs. This other relative
who's more closely related. I mean, I know technically she's not related.
She's an in-law.
Yeah, she's not related to him at all, but it is a weird thing.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, I guess, is that the way, I mean, we've talked about widows in the past, and I mean, the famous one that we talked about was the woman whose husbands kept dying, and then she ended up seducing her father.
She's coming up again, actually.
Is she?
Yeah. Tamar.
Yeah. So she married a whole series of brothers.
Right. Yeah.
Was that because they had to? Is that what it was? I can't remember.
Yeah. So the first one died, and then the second one had to, it was his responsibility to marry her, and then he would father a child with her was the idea.
But it would be his brother's child.
Yeah. Who would get his inheritance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I don't really understand the economy at this time.
It's a bit weird. All right. So she curls up at his feet.
Yeah.
And he's like, this is hot.
Yeah.
But.
She's touching my feet.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a closer relative who you need to meet with first. And crossing fingers, he'll find you detestable, and then I'll get to marry you.
He doesn't have a foot fetish.
And so, yeah. Okay. And then she goes back to her mother-in-law, and she makes it very clear that he's going to want this figured out today.
Yeah.
So you're going to know who you're marrying by the end of the day. Does she want to marry this guy? She seems to be doing pretty good without a man.
Yeah. I think she seems to like him. She likes that he likes her, I think.
Okay. All right. Sometimes
which I think is the most you could really hope for back then.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess. Yeah. If he seems nice enough.
Yeah. He hasn't hit me once.
Right. Yeah.
Or
he stopped other people from raping me.
Yeah.
So I'm in love.
Yeah. That's where the bar was back then.
What a great tale of feminism we're listening to.
Right. Yeah. Fathers galore. This is chapter 4.
Not fathers everywhere, and not a drop to drink.
That sounds really weird.
I know. That's why I love it.
Meanwhile, Boaz went up from the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you should buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Wives, always endangering your estates. Am I right, fellas?
Why would it endanger his own estate?
I have no idea. I just have no clue.
You think his wife wasn't into the whole multiple wives thing?
Maybe.
She was like the one wife in the entire Bible that was like, no, we're not doing this.
If anything, I'm getting another husband.
Yeah. You're
going to get a brusband.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So, I'm glad for a minute there when he was talking, I was like, because this is the first time it's come up that she's selling the piece of land.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when he was talking about her selling the property, I literally thought they were talking about Ruth.
Oh, yeah. And that's another thing that's kind of confusing about this is apparently, from what I was reading around this, apparently like the law around this whole thing would have only applied to like Naomi.
Right.
She should have been the one that's getting married,
Okay.
and all this. It wouldn't be the daughter-in-law.
Right.
And everything. So they really, apparently with this story, it is playing fast and loose with the rules around this stuff.
Or maybe Ruth was like, Naomi's too old. Nobody wants to marry her.
Right. She's not going to bear any children anytime soon.
So therefore, like...
She's probably like 18, 19 years old.
Yeah, that's too old.
Ripe age. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." I always love it when it's like a whole bunch of people saying this whole complicated thing at once.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Have you ever been to a Catholic mass? Because that shit happens.
Yeah, that's true. Catholics really perfected that.
They really did. That's a lot of everybody speaking all at once. The same thing. So perhaps the son, well, the dad died first, right?
The dad did die first.
So they would have received the property as an inheritance.
Yes.
So I guess it would make sense that she would come along with that.
Oh, that's a good point.
Property, because it would have gone to them first before their death.
Yeah.
And
what happened with Orpah then?
Yeah, she was given both were given the opportunity to go back to their parents.
Yeah. So I guess maybe by that the property for that brother would have gone back to Naomi, maybe. Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting first of all was Rachel and Leah, as in the cousins that Jacob married.
Oh, right. Yes.
And it wasn't just them that built the family of Israel. It was also their servants that they gave to Jacob as sex slaves.
Yep.
And who had some of the kids as well.
Right.
Second of all, you obviously remember the story of Judah and Tamar, where Tamar married two of Judah's sons who both died. And then she pretended to be a prostitute to get Judah to sleep with her.
And he did.
Yes, and he did. And then, but he didn't know who she was and everything. And then he heard that she was a prostitute and he threatened, and he was about to burn her alive. And then found out that she was pregnant with his baby. And he was like, "Oh, I made a mistake."
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he's.
Yeah,
it was really crazy. Anyway, Perez was the firstborn son from that. And this sets up the very ending of this story. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David.
Like King David?
Yes,
okay.
King David. So this is King David's grandfather.
How does he become a king? They're not from a...
King David becomes a king.
Yeah, but how does he become a king?
He gets appointed by God, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, he replaces...
he didn't come from a royal bloodline.
So the brief history of that, King Saul was the first king who got appointed by God by this prophet Samuel, who supposedly wrote this book.
Okay.
According to tradition. King Saul pissed off God by not killing... We talked about this in the last episode, by killing all the women and children of the Amalekites.
Oh, but not all the cattle.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, that was the incident where God was like, "I'm tired of this fucker," basically, and told Samuel to replace him, if I remember right. And Samuel replaces him with King David.
Okay.
So this is King David's grandfather.
Okay. So I'm super confused by the whole thing because Ruth had the baby.
Yeah.
Her husband, but it's Naomi's baby.
That's what they say. I don't know if maybe that's just because, she's the grandmother of the baby, and they just weird about saying who's son,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a redemption thing where it's sort of her baby by she's the oldest that's in the family.
Right.
I don't know.
That seems weird.
It's a weird phrasing for it, but
It really is. Is that the end?
So then the very end after that is this. We get a genealogy of King David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadab, Aminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. And that's how the story ends.
Okay.
According to Wikipedia, the
guy's
genealogy
name was Salmon?
Salmon. Yep.
Like
literally spelled exactly the same.
Not Solomon? Salmon?
Not Solomon. Solomon has an extra O in it.
Yeah.
So
Salmon.
this is salmon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who knows how that was actually supposed to be pronounced.
Right.
But, according to Wikipedia, the genealogy that concludes the book is believed to be a post-exilic. So like after they've returned from Egypt because Persia freed the area, all that stuff. It's a post-exilic priestly edition, so from the priestly source, as it adds nothing to the plot. Nevertheless, it is carefully crafted and integrates the book into the history of Israel running from Genesis to Kings. So it basically saying that they just added this so that it fit in with the history
this is where
David comes from.
Yeah.
Yep. Because if you
but
you probably don't remember this.
Made up story.
Yeah, it's a fictional story, most likely. Okay. As far as we know, this was likely just supposed to be a fictional story.
Yeah.
So this little genealogy piece of it might have been added later when they decided to take this piece of literature and put it into the Bible.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
You probably don't remember this, but when we did read the book when we were reading the story of Tamar and Judah, which I think was chapter 38 of Genesis, if you're interested in reading that story, it does end with a little genealogy that does kind of get into that as well. So this kind of ties in.
Gotcha.
There.
All right.
That's
it. That's the whole story of Ruth.
That's the whole story of Ruth.
She's a very good daughter-in-law.
She is.
I mean, if I took anything away from that story, she really, I assume this dude was old. I don't know.
Boaz?
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't really give any indication.
He mentions that he's like, one of the reasons he thinks she's a good woman is because she didn't go chasing after the younger, hotter men.
Yeah.
Is basically what he said.
Yeah, regardless of how rich they were or anything.
Yeah. How is this a feminist story? I
don't know. I think it's a feminist story for people who hate feminists. Like those women who hate feminists.
Yeah. They're not terrible characters, and there's worse things about women in the Bible, but this definitely didn't. I don't know.
What I've heard a lot of people say against it is that it props up the idea that women's value comes from who they marry and them giving birth to children.
Right. 100%.
So.
Yeah, and you mentioned the bond of the women.
Yes.
I guess, just because two women like each other doesn't mean they're feminist icons.
No.
The relationship is weird to me because I guess in one way, Naomi was like, you can go. She wasn't like compelling them to stay, right? She didn't keep them so that they would bring her something.
Right. It is interesting that she took them to a certain point and then was like, go back.
Yeah.
But they started to leave altogether.
Well, they were probably pains in the ass.
It might have been.
She was like,
God, they synced up.
They're both bitches at the same time.
Yeah.
You guys can just go. But when one left, then that problem would have resolved itself, right?
I guess so, yeah.
But it ended up working out for her because Ruth did. She brought a ton of food home.
Yes, yeah.
By gleaning.
She took care of her.
Yeah. And B, consented to, I guess, being property that could be bought and sold because that's essentially what she was.
Right.
And then was able to provide her mother-in-law with a life that was an end of life that was well taken care of.
Yeah.
And a baby, it sounds like. I don't know.
That's all Naomi wanted.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't know. It's weird. What a weird story.
Right.
I would be interested in knowing what, Christian women take from this story?
Yeah.
I don't find it personally endearing. I mean, the only time if I were a Christian woman, the only time that I would lean on this story is if I had a daughter-in-law who was terrible. And then I'd be like, why can't you be more like Ruth?
Yeah.
But other than
or trying to be like Ruth to your mother-in-law.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a story of subservience.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, she did everything Naomi told her to do.
Yeah. She did it willingly.
Yes.
You know,
I guess that is maybe the difference.
Yeah.
And what makes it a feminist. Because, I mean, I will say being a feminist means
exercising your choices.
So the women who decide to be stay-at-home moms or the women who decide it's not one pathway for women over another. It's like, as long as they're able to make their own decisions about the way their life is going, then that's all we want. That's all we want.
That's why this is a feminist book, is because this is the one time in the Bible women had a choice.
Yes. I guess. And really the choice was like, but does she? That's the thing you have to kind of like, on the surface, it does seem she's very willing to do all of this. But like, if you think about it, her choice was either to go back to her parents and get sold off to another man. And who knows what those men are like. And I say selling off because, that's what they did. Women came with dowries, right? So you weren't even selling, like you weren't getting anything from it, but they were part of a package that you were giving to men. And who knows who that could have been. I don't know. I still don't know.
It's tough to figure out what to really take out of this story.
Yeah. Because like I said, she feels very willing, but is it a lesser of two evils choice?
Right.
Which isn't free choice, really, because you're shoehorned into making one decision over another.
Yeah.
You're not getting to make the actual decision you want to make.
You're not making the decision of what's going to make you happy. It's what's going to make you least sad.
Right. What's gonna be the thing that is the least horrible thing that you do.
Right. Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, it happened to work out. This man happened to be nice so far that we've seen. We don't know.
All that really matters is that she had a baby from the
of
relationship.
Course.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's as far as we care about.
Yeah. We don't know what happened to her after that. If she had any more kids.
We don't even know if she died during the pregnancy or during the birth.
That could be why they were like, Naomi has a son because Ruth died.
Yeah.
That's a real bummer to end a story on, I guess, right?
So let's just not mention that part.
Or Ruth. I will give the story a C, a solid C in feminism.
C for Christ.
Which is a pretty high score.
Yeah.
For the Bible.
That's true. That is really true. That's true. Well, it'll be interesting too to read Esther and see how it compares, because it's from a different time. And it's a very different story.
Is it?
It's a very different story. It's really and also I think it's definitely less of a feminist story. Like, it's not so much about the woman in that story, but
just happens to be there.
I haven't read it in a very long time. I just watched an overview video on it, but she seems more like a MacGuffin. Like that's a thing in a story meant to keep the story going.
Okay.
Is what the impression I got was.
Gotcha.
It'll be interesting to read it, though.
You started this whole thing talking about how they shouldn't intermarry.
They're not. Yeah, there's a law that says you're not supposed to intermarry.
That didn't come up in the story at all. 0% did they talk about.
They didn't talk about it at all. No,
at all.
But that was the thing that it was doing. Was obviously she was Moabite, which they weren't supposed to have any sort of treaty with, even.
Right.
Yeah, and then they married her, and then not only did I think it was Mahlon was the son that married her, but then Boaz did as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And none of the elders.
Nobody ever says anything about it.
Said like, hey, guy, that you shouldn't do this, right?
Right.
And they just seemed like it was a rule put in place that no one actually listened to or cared about.
Right. Some biblical scholars seem to think that this was a protest to Ezra's policies. When I read it, it to me, and I don't, I'm not a biblical scholar. I don't know how old the text is or all that kind of stuff. But to me, it almost makes it seem like maybe that rule wasn't around at that time.
Yeah, because there wasn't even like if it was a protest against a rule.
Yeah.
If that's what the intention of the story was. I mean, they did it very subtly.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess not really subtly, but you would think they would have put some sort of plot device and like, I know that we're not supposed to blah, 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 but she's a good one.
Yeah.
She's one of the good ones.
Yeah. I know. They never really, they totally do give, if anything, an exception just for her, but they never address like Moabites as a whole.
Right. Yeah.
And they all lived miserably ever after. Thank you so much for checking out our podcast. Help us share the good news by sending this to a friend or leaving a review to help others find us. And if you want to support us with a donation, you can do that on our website at bsfa.cc. I don't know how to wrap that up.
Yeah.
I started going down this hole and I was like, I could just keep going, I guess.
You're better than Ezra, babe.
Oh, thanks. He was left desperately wanting.